Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
I'm Jena Brown.
I'm Kevin Tumlinson.
And I'm JD Barker. Welcome to Writers Inc. Welcome back, Kevin. How was your week away?
It was
Yeah,
good.
your bourbon drinking championship.
Yeah, how was
Yes,
it? Did you win?
world champion, 4 years running.
Practice, practice, practice.
But I've been drinking for like 10 years, so I just don't remember the pre. I don't know whether I won or not the
I
first
see.
Well,
Right.
no,
first
nobody,
six.
nobody wins a marathon on their first day out.
That's
Like you got
right.
to work up to it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was in New Orleans for the Writers MBA conference, which was good. It was a good conference. There's like 200 people there, and everyone who shows up for that one has reached a certain level of success. So it was kind of nice to not have the same questions over and over again. Like they were asking harder questions to answer, but we got there. We got through it. It's good.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
So
yeah.
I'm officially a #2 New York Times bestseller again.
Ah, you spoiled it. I was gonna slip that in as a
Congratulations.
secret news item.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I was hitting the refresh button yesterday because they released a list online on Wednesdays for, I think it's April 6th. They're like a week
yeah.
or something ahead of time. I honestly thought Hunger Games was going to hit #1. I don't get what, I guess we're going to talk about that a little bit, but
Yeah,
it wasn't on the list.
that is
Um,
yeah, I can't understand it. It was not
Yeah,
on the
and
list.
Rebecca Yarros was in the #1
Them
spot,
dragons.
which and that book released in January. So I haven't gone and looked at back list, but I'm guessing she's been #1 since January when she released
Yeah.
that, which is
At
is
one,
insane. I looked on Goodreads; it's got just a little shy of 1 million reviews,
Yeah.
which is just that's a whole other world right there.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
crazy.
I think
That's
at
that
one
book
point,
talk love right there.
Yeah.
yeah, at one
What's
point
that?
she had one, two, and three on the New York Times list.
Yeah.
All three of the books in that series just
Yeah.
shot up.
I think she was 1 and 3 this week, and JD was two. Um,
I'm ready to write a letter to the New York Times and tell them they need to introduce a new list that's like just like just released, like or some like there needs to be like I know they've
yeah.
retired books like Ghost Set a
Mhm.
Watchman I think was on there for a really long time and they took it off. Hillary Clinton I think had a book on there that was on for a long time and they eventually took it off. I don't know what the rule is there, like if they have a set number of weeks or something, but
I don't know, because
uh,
Colleen Hoover, one of her books was on there for like a year and a half or something, maybe even longer. It was like a crazy long time that
Yeah.
she just kind of went up and down that number 1 through 10 just sort of bounced around.
yeah, so I'd like to see a top 10 of new releases.
Yeah, I think
Like maybe just books that came out.
Publishers Marketplace has that. Like you can look for the
They stopped that?
did they stop it? They were doing it. I don't know.
I
Which
don't
was
know.
like, yeah, that was new releases only. And I was looking at the bestsellers list because I knew you guys were going to hit with the writer and just the variability between the lists I didn't understand. So New York Times has Onyx Storm as #1 and USA Today had Hunger Games as #1, but Hunger
Yeah.
Games did not make the New York Times, and
Which
Onyx
is
Storm was
so
19 on
weird.
USA. And I'm like, where are we getting this book data? I don't understand any of
Yeah.
it.
Well, the New York Times will never tell you, and they'll just like, swear up and down, nod, nod, wink, wink. We're capturing the good data. Like, okay, New
Yeah.
York Times, that's fine.
N-
Well,
New
they're
York
still the only
Times.
one that really matters. Like even on a
Yeah.
worldwide basis, I can use New York Times bestseller pretty much everywhere, and they know what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
USA Today, Wall Street Journal, all those other ones are nice, but like the New York Times is the one that matters.
That's why they get away with it.
Yeah, I mean,
The
honestly, like
ones
they
matter.
should somewhere there should be a web page at this point that explains, how they get to, like what it takes to be on the list and what their
Yeah.
parameters are. Like they should have to define that, I think.
I think
Not so
so too.
people can
Yeah.
game it, but just so people understand it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
had that I don't know if we want to talk about the Hunger Games news item first, because it has their sales, which to me is just wild with those sales. It's
Why
not on
don't
the New York
I
Times
bump
bestseller
that one
list.
up the news
Yeah.
list and then we'll talk about that one first. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm starting to
Kevin,
put,
wait, we got to do this right. What's in the news starting with the Hunger Games?
let's do that. Hunger Games prequel sells 1.5 million copies in first week. Scholastic reports that Sunrise on the Reaping, the new Hunger Games prequel, sold 1.5 million English language units across all formats in this first week, with U.S. sales exceeding 1.2 million units. Circana Bookscan shows that this includes nearly 715,000 hardcovers in the U.S., and Nielsen Bookscan tracks sales of just over 118,000 hardcovers in the UK. Sunrise on the Reaping has sold twice as many copies its first week as The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes in 2019, and three times as many copies as Mockingjay in 2010. See, I thought this story was going to be about the new Hunger Games illustrated book because they
No, this
re-released
is
the
a
first book. Yeah, so
Oh
I
no.
no.
wasn't
She
paying
she
close
figured
enough
out a
attention.
she figured out a way to really like she can make this last forever if she wants to.
Yeah,
Because I think the previous Hunger Games that was what like number three or something in the Hunger Games world. It was like very
Four.
early on.
It
Four.
was number
This one's
four,
number
yeah, and
yeah.
so this
So
one's
this
number
one's year
five.
50.
Yeah, so the
It's a
first one
prequel.
was the rise of
Yeah.
President Snow, is
yeah,
essentially
Right.
that's what that
But
story focused on. And this one I think is Haymitch. It was never
it
confirmed, but I think that's what it was.
No, it definitely is. But my point is like she's hitting the years, like this is the
Yeah.
50-year Hunger Game. The last book that they did, I think it was like the third or fourth Hunger Game. It was real
Yeah.
early in the Hunger Games.
yeah.
The original series, I think, was the 75th, if I
Yep.
remember right.
Well,
So yeah,
yeah,
so
number
she's got like 70 more books that she can write in this universe if she wants to, which is really, really
Yeah,
smart.
yeah, because
If
what was the Ballad of Songbirds was not. It was like we were pretty far into the Hunger Games at that point. They were just reinventing it. That's where the president comes along, who would be president, whatever his name was.
Yeah,
They
it was before
reinvented the
the Hunger
games.
Games. So you have the
Yeah,
first three books, and then President Snow was
Snow. Yeah.
in
So
charge and old,
they
and
still, she still has the sort of deep archive thing of this, like going way back to the first Hunger Games. She's going to mine this for a while.
yeah.
she could.
Now, I should have done my homework and called my editor and found out how many copies of the writer we sold to hit number two to try and put some of this in perspective.
Oh
But
yeah.
I did not do any homework and I forgot to send that email. So I'll see if I can find out what that number is, just so
Yeah.
we have an idea.
Let's keep that private. Let's talk. We'll throw that in our own thread. Let's not. We won't share that with
I
anybody.
I'm just curious. I mean, I know we sold a lot, but like I couldn't tell you what that number is.
Yeah.
Not off the top of my head, and I should know it.
Yeah. That'd be good info to have. And good to have that kind of insight. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad we're friends, JD. Next up, can Simon and Schuster become the A24 of books? The imprint's new publisher is betting on it. Sean Manning, the new publisher at Simon & Schuster, is overseeing innovative projects like the web series Bookstore Blitz to transform the publisher into a 21st century media powerhouse. The series features guest authors racing against the clock to choose books within a budget, hoping to engage viewers and promote books in a dynamic way. Manning's approach at Simon & Schuster is to leverage the potential of authors as cultural tastemakers, moving away from traditional dependency on external media for book promotion. Manning is inspired by media companies like Vice and The New Yorker, which have successfully expanded into new media formats. He wants to apply similar strategies to Simon & Schuster, enhancing its role beyond traditional publishing by exploring new promotional avenues and partnerships, along with more direct and innovative marketing tactics. I, for one, support this move.
Can I just tell you how much I love this? Do you remember that game show? What was it like shopping? There was like you just have a shopping cart and have to like tear through a
Oh yeah,
shopping store
Yeah.
like
yeah.
mad and dump stuff in your shopping cart.
Yes. Yes.
But
I do like
that's
that.
this but with books.
Yeah.
So JD,
I
when are you
mean,
going on Bookstore Blitz?
I mean, I love this. I mean, these guys are really open to new things, which is one of the reasons why I love working with Simon and Schuster. So, like I've mentioned before, I'm doing this contest for something I keep upstairs, where we're giving
Yeah.
away an overnight stay to somebody to stay in the actual haunted house in the book.
Yeah.
So, as a side contest, I created like a secondary thing for bookstores. I created posters and things that they can use as displays in their store. And if the winner we select for the overall contest comes from their store, I'm giving that bookstore $1,000.
Mm.
So we're, so we created a reason for bookstores to hang the posters and actually talk about the book. But the reason I'm bringing this up though is when Simon and Schuster got wind I was doing this, they asked for like all the marketing material I have around it. And like people on their side, their salespeople are reaching out to bookstores on my behalf to actually push this.
That's
And I
cool.
can tell you, like I've had books with HarperCollins and Random House, and like if I did something this outside the box, they wouldn't want any part of it. They wouldn't support
No,
it in any way.
they'd probably
You
try to
know,
shut it down.
yeah, well, they might. I mean, just
Yeah.
because it doesn't mesh with, whatever plan they've already got in place, and it's something different, and they don't like different. But Simon and Schuster, like they are going out of their way, which is a beautiful thing. I think this industry really needs more of it.
Yeah.
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 I was reading some of the quotes in this article and I really like, if we remember, he already got rid of book blurbs. That was his first move, which was a bit radical. And then he's talking about um like doing this so we know who authors are. Like he's like authors are marketable, their personas are marketable. And I listened to a podcast that two agents do, and they've been talking about getting outside of social media about the big five directly being tastemakers and pushing their authors. And I don't know if he listened to that or what, but it seems he took notes. One of his quotes that I thought was really good. What was he talking about? We're essentially an entertainment company with books at the center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
That's
a
a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
yeah, and that's not it's starting to become a theme with companies. I'm kind of working with a publisher that's taking that approach as well. Like
Yeah.
looking at the IP as a whole,
Yeah.
and how do we leverage that, across the board, but not just how do we create more product, but how do we engage an audience that is, more and more is trained to look for content over anything else. Like you know,
Yeah.
and I talk about this on the Word Slinger podcast today. Like there's a shift right now from the attention economy to more of the perspective economy. And
Yeah.
so a lot of what these companies and groups are doing is aimed at that. Like how do we engage an audience using the human aspects of the author and that sort of thing?
Yeah.
That we're getting some fun stuff now because of that.
Well,
Yeah.
I think sometimes that's what happens when you have like, I mean, AI is sort of
Yeah.
like not obviously pushing that, but people want now more than ever, I think, to really know, is there a person
Yeah.
behind what I'm purchasing? And, are these ideas new and how to, so I think that you do get like kind of people want a more in-depth look at everything that they're consuming instead of just sort of that 15-second entertaining clip or like that fast read. I do think that there is starting to come out more, people want more depth. And I think knowing
Yeah.
the person behind it is a part
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that. The other interesting thing I thought he said was, publishing is just pushing to the converted, like already to people
Yeah.
who want to read and looking outside of that. So they're doing like some awards show for the National Book Critics Circle Awards. And then the
Uh,
last comment was, "Oh men, how do we get them to read more?" And that just made me laugh.
That's a
Yeah.
really good point. I mean, it's almost like the traditional world. They're selling books to people that are already standing in the library,
Yeah.
yeah.
instead of trying to rope in somebody new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
And there's an
I think,
attrition that's going to happen there if you don't,
Yeah.
if you don't improve your discoverability with these groups that aren't already primed to read, there will be attrition. Eventually, people do this thing called dying. And as much as I intend to avoid it, it's still something that catches up with all of us. And if you're going to be a writer or produce any sort of content in this world, you need an audience. And if you're not doing something to bring them in, then eventually you're going to be left with nothing.
yeah. Well, I do know that that's part of what has made Rebecca Yarros a success is
Yeah.
that the fourth wing is getting people who normally don't pick up a book to read. I mean, it's got the buzz and people are excited about it. But I mean, sort of the same way that, the Da Vinci Code did all those years ago with thrillers,
Hmm.
right? Like everyone was reading it and it sort of became like, you had to sort of have that in your beach bag that summer
Yeah.
or, and
If
I
you
think,
intended to be cool,
right.
which
And I
I
think
did.
and social media has done some interesting things with that too. Like I've seen a lot of accounts where, women who are primarily posting have gotten their husbands to read it, as a way of um, bonding and have something to talk about. And I think like that's kind of an interesting thing that I don't think has happened before. And I think that because it is a romance novel, but it's also in a war college, it really does have kind of that sweet crossover spot that can appeal to husbands and wives at the same time. So it's very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
More dragon smut, though. That's what the writer needed. Uh,
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, and just to be clear, the dragons and the smut are separate.
I know.
If they're together,
That's,
it's something else entirely.
I think that's where we're missing out.
Ah,
Playing all the wrong
No.
notes.
Oh man,
no.
Kevin.
I think let's
We got
keep
one,
them separate.
we got one last news story here. I have words for this one. Bill Bryson, too many people publishing their own books. Best-selling author Bill Bryson has expressed concerns about the vast number of self-published books flooding the market, suggesting it dilutes the quality of literature and makes it challenging for genuinely talented self-published authors to gain recognition. The number of books published annually in the UK has surged from approximately 120,000 to 200,000 over the past decade. Bryson points out that this oversaturation makes it difficult for readers to find quality among the quantity, with many self published works struggling to sell more than a few dozen copies. The growth in self publishing, particularly through platforms like Amazon, is seen as problematic by some of the industry, including Bryson, who believes it encourages people to publish without understanding the dedication required to craft a compelling book. I
Wow.
don't actually
Where's this guy
disagree.
been living? That's what I want
I
to
don't
Yeah, I
know.
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 I just wanted to say before we get into this, because I know we will, that this was sent in to by a listener, Sam, who I think has
Hi,
asked these
Sam.
questions before. So thanks, Sam.
Yeah. I don't actually fully disagree. I get the argument he's making is that, with the sort of influx of when you've got millions of indie published titles or self-published, however you want to frame that, then yeah, you're going it's going to be overwhelming to figure out who's, but I think that there's processes in place that sort of already help us see what's good and what's not. Like you see things rising to the top.
Mhm.
Discoverability is definitely a problem in this business, but it's not just us. I mean, if you got a traditional deal and no one's ever heard of you, you might as well be self-published because the amount of exposure you get is about the same. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't agree that there's too many. There's not too many. It's just that we need better ways of finding the reader for those works. That's what we need.
And
Yeah.
the market's definitely saturated. I mean, like if
Yeah.
you think back to like when we grew up as kids, the books that were in our elementary school library, like we all had the same books, we studied the same names. There
Yeah.
wasn't a whole lot out there. Now we've got the exact opposite problem. I've heard rumblings of Amazon considering stuff like archiving titles if their rating drops below a certain level after a certain amount of time. I think they're already doing that in a roundabout way. Their recommendation algorithms are basically ignoring a lot of those titles. So it does cause the cream to rise to the top. But this problem is it's gonna get way worse before it ever gets better. I don't think there's an actual solution for it.
I think the
Right.
solution is just like anything else. And I know it's annoying and like, a lot of people don't want to hear it, but with anything, I think, if you look at it that, everything you do, success is a marathon, not a sprint. And so when it comes to writing books, whether you go traditional or indie, like you just have to keep writing books and keep releasing the books and keep doing the best that you can to try to reach your readers. And eventually, it's like that determination like hits a threshold where, if a reader discovers you and they discover your back catalog and then it grows and then it grows and then it grows. And there's no magic answer that like guarantees that you're going to be found or discovered, and it's not a sexy answer, but I think like that's the only answer, is that if you want to write you just have to keep writing, and I
Yeah.
think that's
As
the
long as
answer.
long as it's good, as long as the writing is good.
The writing
Well,
should be.
yeah, if it's good, you're gonna find your readers, and you just have to
Yeah.
keep
Yeah.
improving and striving. You just have to keep
Well,
running your race,
and in
essentially.
fairness to Mr. Bryson, whom I actually love his books, so I don't want to be harsh on him. But in fairness to what he's saying here, like he has a good point in that a lot of people do rush to publish without considering, the quality of the work and the craft. They're not taking the time. But he sounds a little elitist the way he's framing it, but I
Yeah.
I don't think he's saying like only people who go through the vetting process should be allowed to print. He just really seems to be saying the problem is you're all rushing to publish right away, and you
Hmm.
may not have done anything to vet the work yourself, even. I don't think he's
The
arguing for
readers, I think,
gatekeepers.
will tell you that. I mean, you
Yeah.
get feedback, and I know
Right.
that this is, again, not like a fun answer, but like you do
Yeah.
get feedback in your reviews and, to a lesser extent, your sales, although, I will put an asterisk there because there are extenuating circumstances to sales. But if you get people reading your books and they say things on Goodreads, like, you're gonna get the feedback. And if
Yeah.
you don't listen to it, you just keep publishing more and then saying like, how come no one's reading my books? Like that's the answer.
Yeah.
Um, it's not an easy business, but I don't know that anything that you do that has any level of success is ever like easy. It's all gonna have.
I think some of it comes with experience too, right? If you think back to when you were a baby writer, if you just put out the first thing you wrote
Oh
and,
God.
maybe you thought it was really good, right, at that time, as we do. But then a decade later, you're looking back and you're like, oh my God, there is some point in your career where you get this light bulb between what is publishable and why
Mhm.
Yeah.
everything you wrote before was not. I don't-
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think
Yeah.
like if you don't have, but there's no way to, I mean, unless you just like forbid indie publishing or put some sort of gatekeeper in place, like people are
Yeah.
going to want to, they're proud of what they wrote and they want to get it out there. And I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's part of what makes indie publishing appealing,
Yeah.
is that you don't have gatekeepers.
No,
I
no, I
don't
agree
know that
with you.
there's,
The market is the gatekeeper. People speak with
yeah.
their
Right.
wallets and their reviews, right? So,
Right.
Right.
yeah.
So, like people can choose to listen to that or not. They can choose to keep going or not. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just need to find a way to stand out. If you look like the noise, you're going to disappear into the noise.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's true too.
So find the way, pull some JD Barkers, man. Go out there and like, I got a new book. I'm gonna stuff everybody into a haunted house because nothing about that seems alarming.
Ah,
Hey, this is Kevin Tumlinson. It seems to me like you might need a little help. Maybe hand off all that stuff that's keeping you from writing. At Author Anchor, we connect authors with skilled, affordable virtual assistants trained specifically for the publishing world. Your personal VA handles everything from book production to marketing and social media, freeing you up to focus on what matters most, your writing. Book a discovery call today and we'll find that perfect VA for you. Plus, mention the Writers Inc. podcast and you'll get $50 off your first month. Visit authoranchor.com and get matched with your personal VA so you can just write.
all right. With that, JD, who is up this week?
This week we've got Adam Nevill coming on. Adam was born in Birmingham, England, and grew up in New Zealand. He's got numerous awards for horror. His latest novel is called All the Fiends of Hell. Horror is having a bit of a resurgence right now. He's going to help explain why. Here he is, Adam Nevill.
You have had a career spanning at least 20 years, I believe, in the publishing industry. So I just wanted to start with your story. What drew you to writing and how did you get started in this crazy business?
Well, I would go all the way back to my childhood. I was very fortunate. My dad read to my brother and I most evenings when we were boys, and he read us a whole range from classics to adventure stories, science fiction, and the most captivating stories for me. My reaction was terror as well as kind of enchantment with the ghost stories.
Mm,
And he read us the classics, and particularly M.R. James. So as I then grew older and lived in a house just full of books. It was like a library. I would just randomly read my dad's books, selecting them by title and but more often cover artwork. So at that point, I was drawn to the horror novels
Mm.
that had, I wouldn't say lurid covers. Most of them had fabulous paintings, and were from the classic weird period. And I was really taken with writers like Algernon Blackwood and Arthur Machen and Walter de la Mare, that kind of classic British period.
Right.
Um, and then in terms of the idea of becoming a writer, I remember it. I was 16 and I was studying English and an English A level, which is just you study 16 to 18 in the UK. And this introduced me to Shakespeare and the modernists and so forth. So it really expanded my reading, and I was so taken with a James Joyce novel, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And I didn't really know that it was quite ironic, but a real penny dropped. And I thought, if I'm not doing something creative, and by this point I'd had enough part-time jobs and probably too much self-examination, I realized, look, if I don't do something creative that involves writing, I'm going to be dissatisfied and unfulfilled in life. So I'm grateful that I grasped that at the age of 16.
Yeah. A lot of
And
us
I
don't figure
pretty
that out.
much, well,
Yeah.
every decision I made from then on was about becoming a writer. So I took an English degree 18 to 21 and started writing seriously in my 20s. Seriously, in that it was a purpose
Right.
each day. My writing wasn't very good. Um, and I had a job for 6 years in television. I got into television thinking it was creative. What I did wasn't creative in a creative industry, which was doubly frustrating. Um, and I wrote a lot for newspapers, magazines, some fiction, short stories. I was writing all the time, but I did feel kind of stuck. So I made the decision, against everyone's advice, to quit my job because graduate jobs were really hard to come by in the 90s in the UK, and jobs in television were almost impossible to come by. And I quit and went back to university to take a second degree, a master's in English with creative writing, because at this point, although I never doubted my ideas for stories, that was the easy part, I had serious reservations about my ability as a writer. So I wanted formal training. And the master's course I took was in St Andrews. It was the oldest university in the British Isles. And all of the tutors were poets. And it was a really good course for me because there was no workshopping about plot or characters or character arcs or what you'd expect. It was all about writing and the technical aspects of writing. So, and that's exactly what I needed. And I almost started from scratch in 1997. I'd actually, I'd actually sold a novel, a series fiction novel under a pseudonym that paid for my tuition fees. So I was a published author and had been for a few years, but a published author with very little faith in his ability.
Mm.
So this course, the start of it, I remember feeling very demoralized. What have I done? I've quit a job. I'm wasting my time. I'm just no good, because the tutors weren't mean, but they did point out that, my writing was exuberant but incoherent. And then I studied for the year, literally writing a sentence. Where does the verb go? Um, Diction, uh, writing a paragraph, the music in language, making language sensory. I had to think like a poet. And after 12 months of this, my kind of passing out was I got a distinction for my dissertation, which was the first 20,000 words of my first horror novel.
Wow.
Banquet for the Damned that I started in 1997. Um, and then I completed it kind of 4 years later. But that was a big moment for me, was doing that masters. No matter how much I felt, no matter how much I read, no matter how much I practiced, I still needed a second pair of experienced eyes, someone with knowledge and expertise to look at my writing and just say, this could be a whole lot better. On the technical side. And
Right.
it was good as well because it created in me that year an internal editor, and I that has just strengthened since, and I cannot fault that editor. It's almost like I sometimes think like a Victorian headmaster
Yeah.
standing beside me with a cane. And if I think, I've done enough with that sentence, I can let that go. The cane comes down across my knuckles, and I go back and rewrite it.
Yeah. That's fascinating because I think a lot of us have that experience, but the editor doesn't come on so strong and we'll give it to beta readers thinking, oh, I think I can get away with this. And they say, no, no, you can't get away with that. No point.
Yeah.
So you have that inner editor that just at the sentence level is really,
I kind of like I guess what I'm
yeah,
saying is I was taught how to rewrite, and
yeah,
that's the single most important thing I think about being a writer is
yeah.
learning how to rewrite, which isn't tinkering with commas and the odd sentence. It's rewriting every sentence um, over and over again and leaving it and going back with fresh eyes until you're saying what you want to in the way that you want to,
Hmm.
which sounds remarkably simple, but we all know it's not.
It's not.
Writing's really difficult. It seems to be easy at a first draft stage, and a lot of people do publish them in the indie sector. They never look over their shoulder.
Hmm.
But go back and look at it 6 weeks later,
Right.
and you'll be in despair.
That is so true. I think a lot of us put it aside for, a month, 6 weeks, and then go back and then you cringe and you have to keep rewriting until you don't cringe at what you're reading
Yeah,
anymore.
absolutely. And there's kind of two ways of approaching, I think, teaching creative writing. There's the more formal one that I was lucky to have that was all about language. It was all about improving your language and your expression because and being taught to think like a poet more as a prose writer. And I think that's really important. The other one is equally as important, but most people go straight to it. It's what I've always called the Reader's Digest technique. So it'll be about plot and structure and
Yeah,
point of view and all of these other components um, that are equally as important, but I think they should come after.
after the line level writing.
You have to master writing first, no matter how long it takes, and you're always practicing and you're always improving. Um, it is very much a long game pursuit, in my opinion. Um, Gosh, that was a really long answer, wasn't
No,
it? Thank
I love that.
questions, really.
Yeah, and I'm reading your book right now. I'm almost at the end, so All the Fiends of Hell. And that was one of the first things that I thought reading it. And I was like, this is really beautiful, poetic language at the line level. And I read a lot, commercial and things towards the more literary end of the spectrum. And I was just thinking that it had such a strong aesthetic and strong voice. Um, and now I know why. So that was
Well, thank you very
fascinating.
much.
Yeah.
That's very kind, and it's interesting you say voice because I remember reading it was a critic about writing who it was the guy that started the Arvin Foundation, and he said the really important thing is the authority in an author's voice immediately captures a reader, and that's what was missing for me in my early days.
Right.
Um, And it's doubly interesting that you have Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds,
I do. Yes.
which when you get to the end of the book, read the story notes, and that will have significance.
Okay. Yeah, I love all sci I have so much sci-fi art you would not. I love that era of
Yeah.
um I think the art is just gorgeous. Yeah, and the album is pretty good too. So
That's why I wrote the novel, All the Fiends of Hell. I
yeah,
heard that record when I was 7, I think, and became obsessed with it.
I mean
And
it's
then,
great. Richard Burton, right? So
oh, tremendous, isn't it?
it is all this prog rock, weirdness, and it's fabulous for anyone who hasn't listened to it. Pour yourself a glass of something, have an experience. I highly recommend it on vinyl. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to, so you've done this master's now. You wrote a book in another genre that was under a pseudonym that paid for your writing? Was it?
Yeah, so it when I was kind of writing in my 20s before I did the masters,
Yeah.
I knew what I wanted to write. It was horror fiction, like a
Hmm.
literary horror fiction that was very much in the tradition of the British horror writers and American,
Hmm.
Lovecraft and so forth.
Yeah.
So I wasn't looking to write 80s horror. I was looking to write something within that legacy, particularly the turn of the century in the 1920s, but contemporary books, not pastiche or historicals, but the particular power in that writing and the effects that I loved so much as a child. That's what I wanted to conjure. But then I thought, well, is this something it's going to take me a long time to master this? And it did
Hmm.
take me 4 years to finish my first book.
Hmm.
Is there anything I can write that won't be so involving and intense and time consuming that I can write as kind of practice and maybe get published? And at that time, Britain in the 90s, you had to get an agent to send a book to a publisher. So no unsolicited manuscripts were accepted by the London publishers. And at that point, pre-ebooks, there were London publishers and there were bookshops. Um, except for two genres. There was Mills and Boon romance, which I
I'm
was under
hoping you're
no
going to tell me
illusions.
that if you're going to write. Come on.
No, I was under no illusions that I could write anything that would appear romantic to perhaps a middle-aged woman. I didn't trust myself with that. And the other genre, interestingly, was which was booming at that time, was erotica.
Mm,
And it was a really broad church. There was like epic fantasy erotica. There was this kind of institutional or academy erotica that was inspired by the story of O. There was kind of crime with erotica, erotica noir. There was so many different subgenres published by about it was Virgin Books and it was Headline in the UK. And I thought, I might have a go. And I wrote away for their guidelines and I had to, I think it was 20,000 words, 10,000 words. And they were really quite strict prescriptive guidelines. It was real series fiction. They Virgin published 4 a month. And just before I was going to St Andrews, Virgin got in touch with me and said, "We want to publish your book." And I was like, "Well, I've only written 10,000 words of it." But this was amazing because I
yeah.
thought, wow, I'm going to get a book published. I'm going off to do this creative writing masters. Um, yes, it was kind of pulp, you could call it. I wouldn't call it lowbrow. Some of the authors were quite literary,
Yeah.
but it was, you know, it was a genre that didn't command a lot of respect, shall we say. But for me, it was a great opportunity, and the advance they paid me paid for my tuition fees.
That's fabulous.
So I went to a prestigious university to
On your
do a
pulp
master's
money.
in English and creative writing
Yeah.
without being able to tell anyone that
Yeah.
I was funding myself with an erotica novel in which I masqueraded as a female writer.
I love that.
Um,
That's amazing.
and it did really well. It was
Yeah.
extraordinary. It sold something like 40 something thousand copies from um, newsagents and service stations and WH Smiths. And they obviously asked me for more. And I thought, well, look, I can really do something with this. It's going to take me a while to finish Banquet for the Damned before I start the next book. And I could write one of these books. I guess I used to spend about a year, if I compressed it, probably 8 months. And I wrote one in first person, one in second person, immediate third, one in an epistolary style. I tried all these different narrative techniques and points of view. So I practiced writing and I kind of cut my teeth. And I ended up in the end, I wrote 9 of them.
Wow.
And the last four, I was doing my old school writer's job in London after I'd done my master's. I worked as a porter in the West End of London, so in livery for in these affluent apartment blocks.
Right.
I carried the luggage and gave keys to maids and called cabs and limos for the residents. But in these lovely surroundings, the one building, I had a fountain by my desk, and the owner of the Sheikh of Dubai had the whole top floor. So it was it was minimum wage, uniformed work, but in a 12-hour shift, I did 4 12-hour shifts and then got 4 days off. I was probably busy for 30 minutes, so I
Hmm.
could write all day,
Those are the best
pretty
jobs.
much, and then get
Yeah.
four days off. So I managed to write 4 erotica novels. I finished Banquet for the Damned, but just at the end of this period, Virgin got in touch with me and said, because I'd written so many books for them, your editor's leaving. Do you want his job? Get out of here. So I took that. I was quite happy with the porter job, but even the residents called me the writer in residence in the
Yeah.
building. But I took the job because I thought, well, I can learn about publishing from the inside. So the erotica, I cut my teeth as a writer. I got lots of practice. And we all know writing can be so demoralizing. But I could walk into a bookshop and see these books on the top shelf with black covers, but they were still in bookshops. It kept me going while I wrote the literary horror at the same time. So that's quite an unusual, I guess, becoming as a writer.
That is a fabulous origin story. I just love every bit of that. And so then Banquet of the Damned, was that your first book that you published under your own name
Yeah.
traditionally? Yeah.
That was the one that really mattered to me. And at that point, by the time I'd finished it, I mean, horror had been dead to mainstream publishing from the kind of mid 90s. It had gone the way of poetry in the Western.
Hmm.
Publishers weren't interested, but it's what I wanted to write. Um, and I finished it and I thought, well, I'll go through the formal procedure now and try and find an agent. And there were 40 odd agents representing fiction authors in the Writers and Artists yearbook that year. And I wrote a letter of introduction to all of them. That's how you used to do it,
Yeah.
you know. And that letter was rejected. All of them were rejected over, I think, 3 years. They eventually all came back to me saying, no, we don't want to look at your book. So no one read it.
Mm.
My letter of introduction was rejected. They didn't want horror. Nobody
Yeah.
wanted horror. And then when I came to work in publishing, it was just the genre that dare not speak its name in publishing meetings. It was dead and buried, and there was I felt quite there was a stronger version to it on taste, and there was a lot of snobbery.
Hmm.
But Banquet was published by a small press. They're now a mid-sized publisher, PS Publishing, but they were a small press then, and they published 700 hardbacks. And Ramsey Campbell wrote an introduction,
Oh,
the great
nice.
British horror writer.
Yeah.
Because I found out about PS Publishing. Ramsey published a horror story of mine in a collection called Gathering the Bones in about 2002. And, when I had his ear and we were exchanging letters of agreement about the short story, I said, look, is there anywhere you can send a horror novel? And he said, try my UK publisher, PS. And I was working in the West Block at Chesterfield House in Mayfair, and I think I'd just given a maid a set of keys to clean a penthouse. And the phone went on the desk, and I picked it up, and it was Pete Crowther, who owned PS Publishing. And he just said, Adam, I'm going to publish your book. And wonderful. So
Wonderful.
700 copies came out. Um, and it kind of gave me a presence in the horror space. I would say it was within horror publications and websites then, it was critically acclaimed. And then an agent asked me if I wanted representation. And I said yes.
That's the way to do it. Just have them find
Yeah, I
you.
mean, it was long, it was tortuous, 9 erotic novels, 5 years as a porter,
Yeah.
a master's, and finally I got an agent, a small press book, finally got an agent. That entire period there, you're looking at a decade. Um,
Yeah.
And I was writing Apartment 16, which was very much informed by the environment I was working in, which was the sort of prestigious apartments in the shishi areas of London. But it was a supernatural horror story set in one of these buildings. And I'd a couple of years later, I'd written most of the ritual. And a couple of smaller publishers sort of said, "Hey, have you written anything to follow Banquet for the Damned? We'd like to look at it." And my agent, John, he was the only real specialist in fantasy, science fiction, and horror at that time. He was the former editor of Orbit and Simon Schuster. So John knew his stuff. And he said, no, let's sit on this and wait for these grass shoots in mainstream publishing to
Mm.
grow. We'll have to wait a
Hmm.
few years, 3, 4 years. And I followed John's advice, and it was brilliant advice because I think it was exactly 4 years after he told me Apartment 16 was finished, the ritual was almost done. It took me 10 years to complete those first three horror novels because then, I had the job in publishing and I was very busy. I had 2 hours a day to write between 10 and midnight. And those two books, Apartment 16 and The Ritual, ended up in an auction
Yeah.
between the publishing houses. So, you know, 10 years before, my letter of introduction was rejected by all the agents. And now I'm in an auction. I couldn't believe it. And it's because, horror had been out of vogue for 15 years in mainstream publishing, but kind of paranormal romance with vampires put the
Yes.
supernatural back on their radar, and the zombie apocalypse stuff was starting to appear. And then there was a breakout novel with a more traditional horror novel, The Birthing House by Christopher Ransom in the UK, which was really big in 2008. And of course, publishers, oh, what? Horror sells. They all want it then at the same time
Right.
because so few people had been writing horror novels. A lot of writers wrote short stories, and there was a very good scene for multi-author collections published by small presses, but not mainstream commercial novels. And I had two. So I wouldn't call it a feeding frenzy, but there was meaningful interest that led to an auction. And that was the next big break for me,
Hmm.
and Pan Macmillan won the auction, and I loved the editor there, Julie Crisp, and they published the first two books so well. They were mid-list books. They weren't big front-list books, but they were mid-list books. Um, and I think both were kind of small bestsellers. And it was just as well because the day of the auction, when I got the book deal, Virgin Books, we'd been bought by Random House, gobbled up by them about 9 months earlier, and they fired most of us.
Mm.
And the day I was made redundant was the day I got the two-book deal. So one door closed and another one
Another one.
opened in 2 hours.
Yeah.
So I was on the phone to my
Wow.
girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I've been fired, and then two-book deal, Pan Macmillan, you know. And it did change my life. It pivoted then because we thought, well, we can start a family, we can
Yeah.
afford to,
Hmm.
and we're not tied to London now. We because previously if you
Hmm.
work in publishing, you have to live in London.
Right.
she worked in the arts. She had to live in London, and we both wanted to move, and we wanted to start a family. This was an opportunity, and I hung on until the second book was published just to make sure it wasn't, two books and then it's all over again, back to the minors, from the majors back to the minors. But I got another 2-book deal, which was better than the first one. So that then enabled us, we could leave London, and we've ended up, we live in Devon by the sea now.
Nice.
So yeah, stick at it for 15 years, and at some point you might get an agent
Yeah.
eventually. But that was in the old publishing system, so pre, Amazon CreateSpace and
Right.
Kindle and KDP. I think at that point ebooks were like less than 1% of book sales, and it was still agents, trad publishers, high street book chains. And it was, it was grueling, and it took me years. But in hindsight, that was a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you had a tremendous career in traditional publishing. You had Netflix films and all this kind of thing.
Well, yeah, it carried
Yeah.
on for eight books. I did 8 books, and then all of them bar one were optioned, and some of them 3 times. Uh, and then one of them was actually adapted into a film. But indie publishing happened, and huge disruption, as you know, in the publishing industry. So the book trade halved, and the mid-list became really not a great place to be as a writer. And writers have taken an 80% pay cut over this decade,
Mhm.
because of book discounting, and net receipts dropped, writers' royalties were reduced. So it was a really tough time. And combined with that, the kind of business side of publishing, publishing went cold on horror again.
Yeah.
So 2008 to 2012, you were the new black. By 2013, you know, I noticed the word horror was slipping out of metadata. And my last 2 books, they more or less tried to position them as thrillers or crime novels.
Mm-hmm.
The word horror wasn't mentioned. So that's when I started taking a real interest in indie publishing, because I was asked, "Will you think about writing thrillers, etc.?" And I thought, well, no,
Yeah.
I'm going to die on the horror hill. I've been at this now. I think it was 15 years by that point. I've got a body of work to write, 8 novels in. I've got so many ideas. I have my own vision for horror. I'm not jumping on another genre.
Right.
Um, and I tested. Do you want me to move on to this
Yeah,
period
go
of
ahead, please. Yes, please.
I tested the water. I had 15 years worth of short stories, and I collected them to 2 volumes, and took a sabbatical year to learn about indie publishing, and combined it with what I knew from traditional publishing as an editor. I was actually in the industry for 11 years as an editor and editorial director. So I knew the editorial and managing editorial side, and generally publicity and marketing, but I knew almost nothing about production and the new platforms, and so forth. So I spent a year, took Mark Dawson's course,
Mm.
Nick Stevenson. They were great. Carla King's books I loved. Did lots of webinars, read lots of newsletters, and then tried these 2 collections. Tested the water, and was just blown away, because all I hoped to do was not lose money,
Right.
because horror had gone out of vogue, and I was aiming, I guess, at a more niche space. But I'd recouped all the money I invested before the first book came out on
Yeah. Wow.
pre-sales.
Yeah.
And I had to seriously question, because the press, I only set up for my short story collections, but I thought, well, I've seriously got to consider a novel now, So when my next novel, The Reddening, was finished, that took 2 years to write. I had 3 offers for the London publishers, but I hated the contracts.
Hmm.
And I thought they were just the standard ones, but time had moved on and those
Right.
contracts were not good anymore. And I thought, well, I don't want to go back on the no man's land of the mid list
Hmm.
and fight a rearguard action on Facebook. So I went against my agent's advice and said, no, I'm going to publish the novel through my own press, which was a huge decision to make because it was taking me so long to become a traditionally published author.
Right.
And I was risking giving up an awful lot. I thought, will I lose my connection to film and TV? I'd won, I think, at that point, 3 awards. Will I ever be eligible for an award? My books will not be in bookshops. Will I ever get foreign rights again? The Pan Macmillan books have gone into over 40 foreign editions. I'm stepping away from all of that. And then, there's not that I cared that much about it, but there is some prestige with being published by the big publishers.
Right.
And I thought, well, I'm giving all of that up, and everybody said don't do it. So it was like stepping into a hole. And I'm so glad I did do it because my gut instincts were right.
Yeah.
And that book, published it 5 years ago, is now my third best-selling book. And I've had this weird continuity from being traditionally published to indie published in that the indie books have gone into foreign rights, have been optioned, have appeared in bookshops, and have won awards. And the readers don't seem to care whether it's Pan Macmillan or Ritual Limited on the spine.
Right. Because they're there to read you as you're you're your own brand. Now you made yourself your own brand and they're there for you and not for the publisher.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was lucky that it was reputation led, and I've traditional publishing to thank for that
Yeah.
because, they did build me over 8 books, although there was a loss of enthusiasm towards the end in horror.
Hmm.
And, it's the age-old thing. My editor, she was terrific. She left after 2 books, and then
Hmm.
you're getting passed around caretaker managers, and
Right.
it's not the same. You're losing momentum. So I felt I had to make a change. And what indie did, because horror is so neglected and it passes in and out of fashion, it doesn't online.
No, the horror readers are always going to read horror, whatever is in fashion traditionally, right? Yeah.
And in the UK, a British publisher would say, yeah, but it's too niche. They're commercial publishers. They have to look at a broad mainstream audience.
Hmm.
Um, but the horror readership, when viewed internationally, is a huge niche.
Right.
So by doing the reddening and my own press independently, I could reposition myself purely as a horror writer who's writing just for horror readers, and that was important. And spent a lot of time moving my loyal readership onto my newsletter and so forth, so I could talk to them directly, which was very good advice I got from, Mark Dawson and Nick
Yeah.
Stevenson and successful indie authors who had done this beforehand. Um,
Yeah.
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 Have I answered a
Yeah,
question
that's
or?
still the best advice. Get your readers on your newsletter and not on someone else's platform. That's fabulous advice. Okay. We're running out of time. I felt like this just flew by. Your latest novel is All the Fiends of Hell. Tell people where they can find you.
Well, there's my website, adamlgnevill.com. All of my ebooks have an exclusive at Amazon, but the print can be found anywhere, and most of the audiobooks can as well.
Okay. What was fascinating to me was the time that Adam took to learn sentence level work. And I'm just curious, is that something you've done or ever do? Is like really look at your writing on the sentence level?
Yes. I think querying does that. I think like when you query, you have to look at your writing on a sentence level because you have 250 words. That includes, your bio and any comps. Like, so you have to make a very tight summary of your book in a way that's appealing and enticing. So like every single word has to pull its weight. Like you cannot have anything wasted. So I think that process has really helped me understand then how to go into my manuscript and do the same thing, those opening pages, and maintain that tight writing.
That's
Yeah.
the important part right there, because if you talk to any agent, everybody spends, a ridiculous amount of time on either that first chapter or the first three chapters, but whatever they're submitting over and over again. And then they tweak those first couple of pages based on the feedback they're getting when those rejections come in. But they completely neglect like the rest of the book. So even if you
Yeah.
get past that hurdle of, hey, okay, I'll take a look at the rest. And then all of a sudden you got to dust off the other, 320 pages and send it in, and nobody's combed it. Like you have to
Mhm.
give every sentence in that book that same amount of detail. And I know it's grueling.
Mhm.
Nobody likes to do that. I hate the editing process, but Adam mentioned in here like that's when the books are made. Hemingway
Yeah.
brought that up too. Like editing is when a book is turned from a pile of words into a bestseller.
I
And a
love
lot of it
editing.
is just it's as simple as taking out like words. Like the word
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
just is like one that I've got a problem with. I use it all throughout the writing, like just the word just. And
Yeah.
then I go back through and like I can literally delete every instance of it because it
That's
doesn't need to be part of that sentence.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
for me, one of those is it was this, it was that. And I'm JD, you're the one who kind of put me on this road. Like I've been, meticulously going through, and sometimes it's unavoidable, and sometimes it makes it clunky to try to work around it. But I found that almost, I'd say 80% of the time, you can delete "it was" from that sentence, and the sentence makes perfect sense and has the exact same meaning you intended, and reads crisper and faster and better.
I
So
love editing. I know I'm a weirdo, but I love it. I love going in and like fine tuning and sharpening. Like it is such a fun game for me. Like I have a list of words that I go in and do the find and like read
Yeah.
every single sentence that way. And then I read a trick I learned is to start at the end and just look at every sentence and then every paragraph and like, does it make sense on its own, and go backwards,
Mm-hmm.
because then you don't get the luxury of just like falling into the rhythm of reading. You actually have to look at each sentence and each paragraph. And then I read the whole thing out loud when I'm done to myself, which is,
yeah,
tedious and weird, but your ears hear things that, your eyes won't pick up. So I don't
yeah.
know. I love editing. I think I really enjoy it. I love
That
it
read
more than
out loud
drafting.
process is kind of tedious, but I want to get to a point where I fall back on that more often because it really is. It's there's a reason why everybody ends up recommending that.
Yeah.
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 Uh,
Especially with dialogue. Like I think like it really, really helps with dialogue, because things
yeah.
that you think like, oh, that sounds fine, someone would say that, and then you say out loud and you're like, no one would ever say something.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good technique going backwards. I'll have to try that. I just did a pass for flatliners, taking out adverbs and making four words into one word. It is oddly satisfying when you're
Yeah.
done. I don't know that I love it when I'm in it, but then when you're done, you're like, that's
Oh
better.
no. Listen, like with anything, like, you can love running, but when you're running, like you're just like, oh, why am I doing this? I hate it. It's miserable, right? And then you get to
Yeah.
the end and you're like, yes. Like, so I don't know. It's
So
it's
it's
a
a
love
post
hate.
runner high, but for editing is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Got it.
it's
I
very,
have to
very
admit, I when
satisfying.
I first started, I hated the editing process. I wouldn't do it, and you can tell in my early books, honestly. But now, I don't know. I've gotten to a point where there is a rhythm to it. I like it. Now I made it part of my like looping process, and now it's kind of a game to go through and find like how many words can I take out of this sentence or this paragraph, and keep maintain not just the meaning and the context, but the enhance the feeling is what I want to do.
Yeah.
Like I intended this feeling in this paragraph. How do I take as many words out as possible and make that feeling the thing that they're paying attention to rather than stumbling over a bunch of, excess words.
Yeah.
And I think it's good too with the voice. Like you really can go through and think about, what, not just like what metaphors you're using, but like what words you're choosing to describe certain things. And like, does that enhance the voice that you want
Yeah.
in the book, and things like that, I think are very it's very fun for me. It's like, I mean, I play Wordle every day. I love crosswords. So it editing feels more like a word game to me, where like
Yeah.
drafting really feels like the heavy lifting, like the work. And so it's editing is very fun for me.
Um, yeah, so like JD said, horror is having a resurgence. But it seems like when genres go out of vogue in traditional publishing, patience seems to be the name of the game. So I'm curious, do you have novels and genres you're sitting on that you're waiting to have a comeback?
I,
Choose
I
your own
told
adventure.
I told Patterson last night we need to put a dragon in the next one. I don't know if he's gonna let I don't know if he'll let me do it, but like I feel like we are missing out on a genre out there.
Yeah.
Dragon
I could
smut.
totally do a dragon in an archaeological thriller. I know a way I can make that work. So
I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure I could fit it into a thriller and make it believable
I think you could.
You probably could. I mean, I think the crossover genres are a lot of fun. I mean, I would personally like dystopian to come back just because I really liked that genre. I don't know if it will, but maybe. But I guess if you just kind of, bring it back and put a twist on it, that's the answer on how to keep genres in vogue, as it were, is you
Yeah.
just sort of like mash it up with something that's trending and you keep it alive that way. I don't know.
If
It's
you
an
can, yeah, if you
interesting.
can give it a fresh coat and
Yeah.
put it out there, you may be the one who relaunches that genre, because
Yeah.
I mean, look, Hunger Games kind of did that. I think. I think there were maybe there's a smattering of dystopian fiction around that time, but Hunger Games like launched a whole new like YA version of dystopia.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and I think the same thing has happened with other. There's been others, and Dan Brown, when Da Vinci Code came out, like it's not like that genre wasn't around for
Mm.
years, but when Da Vinci Code kind of came out, it ignited something, and so you had a pretty strong. After that, it was like a couple of decades of,
Yeah.
that genre of fiction kind of being dominant for a while.
It's
Well,
pretty
you can
interesting.
use it like like my thrillers far outsell anything else that I write, and I see that in my foreign sales. Like every thriller has sold to foreign markets, and like I've got a number of horror novels that haven't. But what I've been seeing is that the foreign publishers are now coming back and scooping up the backlist horror stuff and
Mhm.
starting to put that out. So now it's becoming like the norm from a publisher's standpoint to
Yeah.
put out my thrillers and my horror, which makes me think it's time to branch out into another genre, that they may shy away from at the beginning, but then I could rope them in too. So I'm seriously thinking about leaning into sci-fi just a little bit.
Yeah.
They're always thrillers, like that's going to be, the base bone of everything. But,
Yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, Flatliners, there's some science fiction going on there. The
Yeah.
book I'm working on with you, Kevin, that's got some science fiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can see that being as like the next big market that I try to rope in.
It's a sci-fi thriller.
Yeah. Well,
Sci-fi thriller, yeah.
I think it's interesting that you said like I'm going to try another genre because Adam kind of did the opposite. Horror was out of vogue and he waited or out of vogue traditionally and then published. And then when it started going out of vogue again, because it was out of vogue, in vogue, he published, I think, 3 books traditionally. It went out of vogue and they said, do thriller. He said, no, I'm going to go indie. I
Yeah.
mean, so I just wonder, like, if it goes out of vogue with traditional publishing, is it actually out of vogue with readers?
No,
See,
I
yeah,
don't think so.
You know?
I agree with that. I don't think so because that's the great thing about indie publishing is we get to actually see what people are actually interested in. Because
Yeah.
if you've got thousands and thousands of releases in a particular genre at any given time, so
Yeah.
you can get a better sampling, at least on like audience taste. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I think that's we know that that's not true because, right now, traditional publishers are scooping up indie authors
yeah,
left and right in like horror and romance and romantasy
Hmm.
specifically, which, was never really out of vogue, but for a long time, you like basically kind of only had like the big players in that genre, right? And they ignored everyone else, not realizing what a wide market potential it could have. So I think traditional publishers suffer from the thing that all big businesses suffer from, which is, the lack of seeing into the future because they focus so much on the past. And so the second something starts to dip, oh, we're not going to do that anymore. They're always
Yeah.
chasing trends, but they're very bad at seeing what's happening. So
Well, you know what? I think it's because it's the same problem Hollywood has, right?
yeah, it's a
They're
big business problem. Pick an
yeah, they're keyed
industry and
in
they all
on
do it.
like what works. That's what everyone's looking for, and it's not unusual because even in the indie publishing space, that's why you'll have someone say, "I just published this dystopian romance dragon smut book, and it blew up," and then suddenly that's what every indie author writes.
Yeah.
So yeah, everyone's
Well,
looking for that shortcut.
Yeah.
and then the traditional guys chase it, right? Six
Yeah,
months after that happens, they have a board meeting going, "Hey, I think we should be looking at this particular, genre over here." And they
Yeah.
yeah,
start sniffing around. I talk about this quite a bit, but to me, like, if you picture a harbor, a traditional author is like a giant cruise ship. And if they
Yeah.
need to turn that cruise ship around, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of time. And an
yeah,
indie author is like a little speedboat in that same harbor. We can do circles around these big guys. And
yeah.
we don't have that baggage. Most indie authors don't look at what's been selling over the last couple of years to determine what they're going to write next. They basically write what they like, or for the most part.
Right, right.
And they end up leading that trend.
You want to
Yeah.
be the minnow, not the Exxon Valdez.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sometimes,
But
yeah.
yeah, so this, I think we see this a lot of, an author hits traditionally and their genre goes out of vogue and then they go indie, and traditional publishing has kind of launched their visibility, but then they take their audience with them. Like that audience
Yeah.
doesn't leave. I wish I had longer to talk to Adam. He's built like his whole empire of self-publishing. So hopefully he'll come back and talk to us about that in the future.
Maybe I need to get him on Wordslinger podcast. You
Yeah.
can guest
Yeah.
host with me.
Okay.
We'll
Sounds
interview him
good.
together.
Yeah, I think he's going to come back in October. He has a new book coming out in October, so I'm going to see if he'll come back.
Ooh, very
All
nice.
right. JD, with that, who is up next week?
Next week, we've got DP Lyle coming on with Kathy Antrim of Outliers Writing University. Outliers is a group of best-selling authors, award-winning authors who basically give back to the writing community by sharing knowledge and expertise through various learning opportunities. A lot of sessions online, a lot of in-person teaching, things like that. But their roster is insane. They've got some of the biggest names out there, giving aspiring authors a chance to basically learn from the best. It's one of my favorite groups, the Outliers.
Yeah, it's going to be great. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.